Hello, hello. It all started in Lobster Chat, where those two guys were having a very interesting conversation, and I was like, that's gotta come on stage at Stable Summit. So I'm really excited to have Marc and Paul up here. I think the previous debate touched on some of the points, but yeah, let's kick it off with. Is governance needed just to give the token a utility?
Ask him. Does it work? You guys? Well, ask him, because our token has some value and some utility. What does Morpho does?
Right. So the way I think about tokens in general is just a decentralization tool for taking decisions that no other people would be able to take. So for example, if you have a decision that requires high degree of knowledge or high degree of activity, it's very hard to imagine that token holders are all knowledgeable and they're all active enough in order to take that decision. If, however, you don't require activity nor knowledge, and you need the decision to be as decentralized as possible, well, you can have a multisig with 10, 15 people. This is how very big primitives in this industry are built. I'm thinking WBTC, for example, is built that way. But then if you want even more decentralization, then token governance is really a way of achieving that, right? So really the way I think of token governance is really a more decentralized way of having multisigs on decisions that cannot be decentralized otherwise, not through smart contracts or not through incentives. But I think it's really the last resort when you can't, build it in the code, in immutable code. I'm sure we'll talk to this about this again. If you can't build an incentive-aligned system and it's all political, then token governance can be used. But to me, it's really the last resort.
I think it's a very interesting view. Let's rephrase a bit the debate. I do believe, and I think you will agree, Paul, there's less distance between the Aave governance and the Morpho governance, and between our networks and our protocols than there is between us and, let's say, a Celsius in terms of centralization, decentralization, and the value add for the end users. To us, the view of governance and the power we give to the token holders within the Aave framework is to act as both participant in the governance and the organization of the protocol, but also, and more importantly, as fail-safe and guardrails. Because right now, on a Metamorpho Vault, I have to trust Gauntlet, I have to trust RE7, I have to trust Techos, which are pretty good at their job most of the time, except Gauntlet. But but I have the choice to pick one of them. But the issue is that I don't have a fail-safe, and the Aave governance is the fail-safe of the creators.
Right. So okay. So let's talk about risk management in the case of governance. So we have two approaches. One is monolithic pool Aave, where every single of the 700 risk parameters are determined by token holders. Right. And we have the Morpho approach, where the core is immutable, and you have also a lot of risk parameters, but you have different risk management vaults that have different governance, right? One of them is MakerDAO, and MakerDAO, is going through the same, I don't want to say the same, but a similar governance process as Aave in order to change risk parameters. But maybe that's not relevant, that's not the, the best governance mechanism for all risk management. And so you have a wide variety of doing risk management in Morpho, and it's completely open, it's completely modular. So some Stakehouse or Block Analytica have put in place a user governance with Aagon, where essentially users of the vaults are able to veto the risk parameters decisions that are taken. But at the end of the day, in Morpho, we don't have an opinion on this. It's really an open marketplace where users will be deciding which governance style they prefer the most, which one they value the most for their risk management.
I think it's an important point. I think everybody loves externalized curation until someone actually loses money. And if you look at the previous model, Morpho-like model, which is more closer to the Morpho Blue model than Metamorpho, if I have to be honest, it was Rari Capital. And Rari Capital has another name in the community, it's the bad debt protocol. Because when you don't have curation, basically nothing prevents low quality and because of the
I agree.
curation,
like you can literally have scams on Morpho Blue.
You can have scam on Morpho Blue, but it's an opportunity.
Like same thing as Uniswap, by the way. Like on Uniswap, you can trade a bunch of tokens that are not the right
but
ones.
the thing is, my exposure to Uniswap is usually one block. While I have a
Not if you're an LP.
lending, I can have it for years. Like I have a position.
If you're LP on Uniswap, you don't keep it for a block usually. I mean, just in time.
You mean LP?
Yeah, like
LP is different. I agree that.
So, you mentioned the possibility for bad debt. There was a CRV accident early 2023.
But I think it's
you want to talk about the...
It's a great example to talk about the CRV attack of November 2022. So basically what happened is it's a failure. There's 4 main risks in DeFi. And that's my talk on Monday. We have a talk together on Monday. Not together, but
really?
in the same room. But my talk will talk about the 4 main risks of DeFi. The main one is smart contract risk, but you also have collateral failure, price feed issue, or risk parameter issues. And that's a collateral curation failure. Because CRV is a great asset, and I love Curve and the Curve ecosystem, and thank them to invite us today. But the risk parameter of Curve in 2020 should not have remained the same in November 2022, because the secondary liquidity, the market cap of Curve, and the risk profile of the asset have changed. But the issue is that we were working with people that work now for him, that were not able to update the risk parameter to the reality of the markets. And that's why we believe at Aave it's really important to not have immutable risk parameters, because the reality of today will not be the reality of tomorrow. We are in the industry of the most volatile asset class in the world, and bear market will happen. So your protocol should be prepared for it or prepared to die.
Right. So on this specifically, so I agree on the idea that risk management is essentially about anticipating the future, and so like fundamentally, it's not something that's immutable. That's not something that can stay static, etc. You have to have updates of like risk parameters, etc. Then the question is, how do you do it, right? And you have essentially 2 approaches. The first approach is really you provide a very passive, almost a fund to the user, where they provide their liquidity, and you're going to manage all the risk parameters for them, and everybody is going to be treated equally, and you trust the governance to act correctly on this. And in the Morpho, so that's the Aave model. On the Morpho Blue model, so Morpho Blue is a trustless and immutable lending primitive. If you lend to Morpho Blue directly, like without, going through any of the risk managed vaults.
But nobody does that.
No, almost nobody. Yeah. But if you do it, you have to be active. Like you have to change the risk parameters. Like if, for example, there is an Oracle failure, you have to change like markets, etc. And this is why at Morpho we have built things in layers, right? So we have the core, which is completely immutable, and we can talk about code upgradeability after, but which is immutable. And then on top you have like the modular layers that essentially abstract away, like risk management, but it's not the only one, like account abstraction, like those kind of things. And this way, users that are depositing in the Gauntlet vault, in the Stakehouse vault, they don't have to care about those. Like it will be updated like constantly. Like it will change markets if like there is a risk parameter change that you want.
But
that implies trust on the risk creation. And
yeah, like on Aave, you trust the token holders, and like ACI and like the legacy, yeah.
Yeah, but my voting power in Aave is from the Aave token holders. Like I have 0 vote from my own tokens. So everything is delegated. But it's an important fact, because when you trust risk curators, you trust them to be good at their job. And when you provided it to the Gauntlet Metamorpho vault, and those guys decide to be liquidity provider to the counterparty of EasyEat as collateral, that might be a good idea because Renzo is a good project. But the thing is that this Morpho Brew vault use secondary liquidity as the price feed and the oracle. And when we got a flash DPEG of a few hours, 100% of the borrower got liquidated, and there's been a tiny fraction. Morpho is going to be fine, but there's been a tiny fraction of that debt. So a user that trusted Gauntlet lost money. And that's, for me, a failure of creation.
Right, so yeah, let's talk about this for a second, because I think that's very important. So in the case of Gauntlet, what they've done is they have multiple vaults, and something that Morpho allows you to do as a risk manager is to build different risk tiers, different risk profiles that is obviously going to yield differently. So I think like the nomination is like Gauntlet Prime, for example, only exposes you to, I think, 2 or 3 blue chip assets, say WBTC STs. It's really like the most blue chip yield you could ever hope for. It's like, you don't get exposed to like, 20 assets and I don't know how many risk parameters. It's extremely simple, 1,000 lines of code in total. It's, to me, it feels like probably one of the lowest risk opportunity in DeFi. Then you have the Gauntlet Core vaults or the Gauntlet LST vaults that have different risk profiles. They onboard much more collateral, and they're yielding much higher than their incumbents and much higher than an Aave or a Compound, for example.
Well,
and yes, like
consider the bad debt, not sure.
Oh, so the bad debt that Gauntlet got in this vault was accounting for 2 days of interest. So it means that the big bad debt that Marc Zeller is talking about is 2 days of interest.
So I think there is, to bring it back to stablecoins, right? So there is this challenge of, you have multiple different vaults, which the pool token of those vaults is unique for each of them, right? And when we talk about stablecoins, you need to have the fungibility, right? You need to be able to achieve scale. So does immutability hinder scalability?
I think there's a two-way to and I'm not sure we disagree on this one. I believe that the base layer of Morpho Blue, has no users. And we never have users. For the same reason, Rari Capital was not a great idea, and I don't think Ajna is a great idea. If you are in the room, hello. This layer, the user experience and the segregated liquidity and the active management make it absolutely not scalable in that sense. And when you have segregated liquidity, usually you end up with a cost of liquidity that increase that also make it non-interesting. But I do believe there's value in allocation of liquidity providing and what we call internally risk-taking, and probably what you call internally like allocator or whatever, to have some kind of flavors of that. So according to the risk profile of the user, in a curated way on our side, and in a more whatever on their side, you will have different risk exposures, just like in traditional finance, you can have exposure to risk range. That will yield different profits. Go for it.
Yeah, so yeah, let's talk about liquidity and fragmentation and everything. This is a very misunderstood topic in general. So liquidity is essentially like the availability of liquidity at the moment you need it, right? And so in the Aave model, and what's really was like the big success of like when Compound came out, and also what made the success of Aave and still does today, is really the fact that all the liquidity is fungible, right? You can go, like everybody is treated equally. So if you come and borrow USDC, like there is a huge pool of liquidity that is available. The downside is, of course, that if you're a USDC lender, you get exposed to the whole pack. But that has worked very well. Like Aave has $20 billion, and this is awesome. And so, like a common idea is that if you have isolated markets, well, you have USDC liquidity fragmented into, like, let's say, 5 different collaterals. So on Morpho Blue, you would have the USDC liquidity that is, backed by BTC, the one that's backed by STEs, the ones backed by whatever, like collateral that is probably more risky than what you can find on Aave. But what matters is really what the users, like the lenders, when they withdraw, what they're able to get, or the borrowers, when they borrow, what they're able to get, right? And so in Morpho, we have 2 components that are built on top of Morpho Blue that really solve entirely for this and does actually better than monolithic lending pools. So the first one is Metamorpho, which essentially reaggregates liquidity for lenders. So if you're depositing in a Metamorpho, and this Metamorpho is going to deposit into 5 different, isolated markets, well, you get the exact same liquidity profile that you would get as a lender if you're depositing on Compound or if you're depositing on Aave. On the borrowing side, we have the public allocator. So the public allocator is a just-in-time RFQ system to get liquidity just in time at the moment you borrow. So let's say liquidity is fragmented in 5 different markets at the moment you're going to borrow. If the risk creators said, OK, we consider those markets to have the same risk, well, liquidity will be taken from those different markets just in time. So you get the same liquidity profile as you would get on a compound or on an Aave. But where it gets interesting is that we don't have only one vault. We have multiple vaults expressing different risk profiles. And those vaults will share liquidity to the extent that they share risk. So what that means is that on Aave and on Compound, for example, you have the same assets listed, right? Or on Spark, you have like STEs, you have WIS, you have WBTC, etc. But those pools are fragmented, right? Like they fragment entirely liquidity. In the Morpho model, if you rebuild like an Aave-like, if you rebuild a Compound like a Spark-like, they would share liquidity to the extent that they share risk. So it's an overall more liquid model than if you build everything as monolithic.
Well, it's so liquid that you need this guy for 65% of your TVL, right?
What, sorry?
You need Spark for 65% of your TVL because it's so liquid, right?
Yeah, but how is that linked to liquidity? Like, what's the link with liquidity?
Outside of this, I think the models are not that different. With V4 that you are aware of, we have this concept of liquidity layer, which is basically a more efficient of way to do things than what you just said.
Like in what ways?
What?
In what ways? Because to me, the liquidity layer is like one big pool of liquidity managed by the Aave DAO that you can allocate to many different things, correct?
I understand, and you are focused still on mainnet for now, and our liquidity layer on V4 is cross-chain, because we have the ability to mint and burn a token on any chain. So you will have the ability to have your collateral on mainnet, and for example, your debt in Go or in A tokens on Base network, for example.
Oh yeah, we don't enshrine bridges in the Morpho protocol.
Yeah, for now. You will have them eventually.
I'm not so sure.
Then we will have them instead of you. So I don't think there's much difference here. I think there's a difference of implementation. The main difference will be that the guardrails that we have is governance. Because everything that you describe is done by external curation and external actors. And as a token holder, more importantly, as a borrower, I don't get a say in all this organization. So if I'm basically borrowing liquidity from whatever in your system, and then the counterparty, so the LP liquidity provider that brings the liquidity on my loan, decide that overnight the risk has changed, or the collateral, my collateral value is not as good, well, they're going to wreck my liquidity, and my interest rate will go high very, very quickly. In Aave, this can happen, because risk parameter can change through governance decision. But our user can voice their opinion, and they are aware in advance through a governance process that something's going to change within the protocol. So there's no way an Aave user is wrecked overnight. If there's something not favorable for them in terms of risk parameters, it's at least 10 days away. I don't think your system allows that yet.
Right, so just to make sure I get it, so you're saying on Aave, borrowers, they don't need to do anything and they can remain passive. That's essentially the idea. And that you would take over like all the risk management for them.
I'm saying they have a say, because there's an actual governance. So
right. Yeah, so I think the...
Because all users matter to us.
Yeah, OK. So very quickly on this, I think the idea is that just Morpho is built in layers and not as a monolith. So you have the core protocol of Morpho Blue, and then on each side you have layers abstracting away like risk management, liquidity aggregation, account abstraction, etc. And that's true for lenders and for borrowers. And to this day, we've released Metamorpho Vaults, and we've released the public allocator for borrowers. We don't have certain features for borrowers, for example, the ability to easily change like markets or have like cross-collateral, those kind of things. But yeah, like this is definitely something that's easily buildable on Morpho without teasing too much.
I think you have a vision of Aave that is most monolithic that is probably not completely true. Because the simple fact that we are on 9 different networks at this point, I don't know if it's 8 or 9, but something like that, there's a set of risk parameters on every single layer we are. So just by that, the risk parameter you will have for one asset on mainnet will probably not be the same on Scroll, for example. That's also a layer approach. And also, with the concept we defend at the ACI, I understand it's not implemented yet, but of relending, we will have several markets, Aave markets. So the one that just passed governance, so I can talk about it as a done fact, because the token holder have talked about it, is the Lido Aave market. So this market will be specialized on it and it correlated asset. The risk parameter you will have and the collaterals you will have there and the liquidity you will have there will be different than on the Aave market, Aave main market. And as a user, you will have the option to deposit on the main market, on the Lido Aave market, or both at the same time and let the protocol decide what's the best yield for you because you are a profit maximalist. So you will have the at maxi option. I want my collateral to be at only, or cross collateral option. I want my collateral to be anything in the blue chip market, or anything that provides me the best money.
So you're fragmenting liquidity into two different Aave pools now?
No, because the users are still Aave users.
So I want to just shift for the last question, because I think we've talked a lot about the mechanics of the lending markets, but I mean ultimately like stable coins are meant to serve as money, and there is trust assumptions around that, and inevitably, it's about having a product that is capture resistant. So how do we solve for capture resistance in the case of upgradable infrastructure, right? So if it's immutable, presumably there is nothing to capture. Well, but how do we solve for that when there is upgradability?
Yes, I think, oh, sorry, go for it.
There's two layers. There's the ERC20 layer, the token layers. So for example, if you have USDC and Circle decide that one user in Aave is a bad guy, Circle will not have the ability to freeze a USDC, a deposit within Aave, because there's no freeze method within the Aave protocol. But they will have the ability to do something to their address, regardless of what is happening on Aave. And the same thing happens on Morpho. If you have USDC on Morpho, on the Circle layer, they can do whatever they want. On the Tether layer, they can do whatever they want. And it's actually a very important thing to consider, is that even decentralized stablecoin, they have USDC as collateral most of the time. It's the case for DAI, but it's also the case for Go on Aave. Around, I think, 5 to 10% of Go is backed by USDC right now. So Circle can act on it. It's more than that on DAI, and that's something that is important, and I think not discussed enough within the ecosystem, is that no matter how decentralized, no matter how immutable your protocol is, you still rely on third parties and how they design their things on their side.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think just coming back to the topic immutability versus upgradability, I think we have to distinguish like what we're talking about, and really there is like the code and the risk management / governance, for example, of the stablecoin. When it comes to code, I'm a big immutability maximalist. The reason why is because for 2 years I've built an upgradable lending and borrowing protocol built on top of Aave, which until today still has like something like 1.5 billion on Aave. And frankly, building on top of an upgradable protocol is really more, especially if you do it at scale and you're planning to scale with like a lot of like TVL and stuff. Essentially, you have to make sure that every time the underlying protocol is upgrading, is not changing this one line of code that you're using. And when you think about it, when an upgrade is performed in a protocol, how do you know, like developers don't check if the lines they're upgrading, they are essentially critical for the smart contracts that are pointing to the upgradable platform. And this is really something that's completely underestimated, I think, in the DeFi ecosystem, is that if you really want to build something that people can truly reliably build on top, it has to be immutable. Otherwise, like, you can upgrade your protocol and it's probably going to kill like another protocol without you even knowing it. On the risk management side,
we're on time, so I'll just give Marc like 30 seconds
Yeah.
to respond to that, because it's an interesting point.
Well, it's a great advertisement for the Aave DAO, because if something changes on the Aave code base, there's going to be a governance decision, and there's no other way than a DAO vote to implement that. So you will know at least 10 days in advance, and you can react.
Right.
If something changes in the allocator for Gauntlet, well, Tarun can wake up a morning and break you. Thank you for this advertisement.
So the Aave DAO checks that every single line of code that is changed is not impacting all the thousands of contracts pointing to the Aave contract. I'd love to see that, because that's not true.
That's not true.
I love that we ended on a contentious point. Thank you guys for
That was very
joining.
fun. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for being here.